The bus was crowded the way city buses always are on a Monday morning. Every seat taken. Every face pointed down at a phone or pressed against a window, careful not to make eye contact with anyone who might need something from them. The air smelled of exhaust and damp clothing and the particular exhaustion of people who had already been awake for too long before the day had properly begun. Amara found a seat near the middle. She had been standing for 40 minutes before this bus came. Her feet already ached inside her worn shoes, the left one with the small split at the toe she had been meaning to fix for 3 weeks and kept forgetting because there was always something more urgent. There was always something more urgent. That was the central fact of Amara's life at 23. Not poverty exactly, though money was short. More like a constant low-grade pressure, the feeling of running just fast enough to stay in the same place. She worked at a data entry firm 4 blocks from the central station. The job paid enough to cover her rent, her mother's medication, and very little else. She had been there for 2 years. She was good at it. She was good at most things she put her hands to, which was something her mother told her often and the world had not yet confirmed. She sat down and exhaled and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. Then the bus stopped and the doors opened and the woman got on. She was old. Not in the vague, difficult-to-place way of some older people. Genuinely old, the kind of old that announces itself in the careful way a person moves, testing each step slightly before committing to it. She had white hair pinned up loosely, a printed blouse that had been ironed with care, and a cloth bag over one arm that she held close to her body the way people hold things they cannot afford to replace. She stood at the front of the bus and looked down the aisle at the rows of occupied seats. Nobody moved. The bus lurched forward. The old woman grabbed the overhead rail and steadied herself, her knuckles going pale with the effort. She looked around again, not with anger, not even with expectation. Just looking. The quiet, practiced look of a person who has long since stopped being surprised by the world's indifference. A man in a suit near the front glanced at her and looked back at his phone. A teenage boy by the window shifted slightly, a half movement that died before it became a gesture. 2 women in the middle seats engaged in sudden urgent conversation with each other. Amara watched all of this from her seat. She stood up. She did not make an announcement. She did not look around to see if anyone was watching or if anyone would do it first. She stood up, moved to the aisle, and said, simply and directly to the old woman, "Please, take my seat." The old woman turned toward her. She looked at Amara for a moment with the careful attention of someone reading something. Then she smiled. Not the automatic smile people produce when offered courtesy. Something slower and more real. "Thank you, my dear," she said. She made her way down the aisle and sat. Amara held the overhead rail where the woman had been standing and said nothing more. That was the whole transaction as far as she was concerned. A seat for someone who needed it. It required no more thought than that. But the man in the seat across the aisle had been watching. He was perhaps 30, well-dressed without being flashy, with the kind of face that was difficult to read until you noticed the eyes, which were sharp and taking in everything. He looked at Amara with an expression she did not see because she was not looking at him. She was looking out the window at the city moving past. What happened next was not immediate. It built slowly, the way most things that matter do. 3 stops later, a young woman near the back called out to the old woman by the window. Her voice was not quiet. "Auntie, is that seat comfortable? You should have taken an Uber. Why are you on a bus at your age?" She was laughing when she said it. Her friend laughed too. The laughter was the particular kind designed not just to be heard but to land, to make its target feel the weight of it. The old woman did not respond. She looked out the window. "Maybe she cannot afford Uber," the friend said, still laughing. "Look at that bag." Amara felt something tighten in her chest. The old woman's hands were folded in her lap. Her back was straight. Her face was turned toward the window and her expression was composed, the composure of someone who has learned over many decades to keep their dignity regardless of what is directed at them. But Amara saw her fingers. They pressed together slowly, once. That was all. One small, private movement that no one else noticed. Amara noticed. She turned toward the back of the bus. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. There was something in the quality of it, A steadiness that made the two women stop mid-laugh and look at her. "She is someone's mother," Amara said. "And she is older than both of you will be for a very long time, if you are lucky enough to get there. Whatever you think you are saying is funny, it is not." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a space completely. The young woman blinked. Her friend looked at the window. The man across the aisle was still watching Amara. Still with that expression she could not see because she had already turned back to face forward, done with the conversation, not interested in the response. The old woman turned from the window. She looked at Amara, who was standing with her hand on the rail, facing forward, her expression already settled back into the ordinary calm of a person on their morning commute. "What is your name?" the old woman asked quietly. Amara looked at her. "Amara." The old woman nodded slowly, as though confirming something she had already suspected. "I am Eleanor," she said. Amara nodded. "Good morning, Eleanor." "Good morning, Amara." That was all. 2 stops later, Amara got off the bus. She did not give Eleanor her number. She did not wait to see if anything would come of it. She walked the 4 blocks to her office in her worn shoes with the split at the toe, and she sat down at her desk and she began her work. She had not done what she did for a reason. She had done it because it was the right thing and because she was her mother's daughter and her mother had raised her to understand that how you treat people when there is nothing in it for you is the only measure of character that counts. She did not think about Eleanor again that morning. Eleanor, however, did not stop thinking about Amara. She sat in the seat the young woman had given her and watched the city pass outside the window and turned the name over quietly in her mind. Amara. She had been riding this bus for 3 weeks. Her car was in the garage. Her driver was on leave. She had told her son she was managing perfectly well, and she had meant it because she had always meant it, across 74 years of meaning it, across every difficulty that had come and gone while she kept her back straight and her hands folded and her face turned toward the window. 3 weeks of this bus. 3 weeks of faces pointing down at phones. 3 weeks of watching people perform the elaborate theater of not seeing what they did not want to deal with. And then this girl. This ordinary girl in worn shoes who stood up without hesitation and afterward defended her without being asked and gave no more thought to it than if she had held open a door. Eleanor looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about what she had seen in that girl's face. Not performance. Not the calculated kindness of someone hoping to be seen doing a good thing. Something simpler and therefore much rarer. Decency. The kind that has no audience in mind because it does not think in terms of audiences. She reached into her cloth bag. She found the small notebook she carried everywhere, a habit from decades ago that she had never broken. She wrote one word. Mark. Then she closed the notebook and looked out the window and the bus moved through the morning and Eleanor thought, not for the first time in her 74 years, that the most important people rarely know they are important. And that it was always worth finding out what happened to them next. The office was the same as it had been every day for 2 years. That was both its comfort and its weight. The same gray carpet. The same fluorescent light above Amara's desk that buzzed faintly when the building's air conditioning ran. The same stack of files on the left side, processed by end of day, replaced by morning. The same colleagues who said good morning and meant nothing particular by it and the same manager, Mr. Osei, who moved through the office with the distracted efficiency of a man who noticed output and very little else. Amara did not mind any of it. She had learned early that minding things you cannot change is a form of exhaustion you cannot afford. So she sat and she worked and she was precise and she was fast and she went home and she made dinner and she gave her mother the evening medication and she sat at the small table by the window for 30 minutes before sleep, which was the only time in the day that belonged entirely to her. Her mother, Grace, was 61 and had the lungs of someone older. A condition that had arrived quietly 8 years ago and stayed, the way certain things stay, not killing but limiting, narrowing the radius of a life degree by degree. Grace had been a seamstress. Her hands still moved sometimes in her sleep as though working fabric that was no longer there. She did not complain. She had raised Amara not to complain. She had raised Amara on the specific and unspoken understanding that difficulty was not an excuse and dignity was not optional and the way you carried yourself when things were hard was the truest version of who you were. Amara carried herself well. Everyone who knew her recognized it even when they had no language for what they were recognizing. On Wednesday, 2 days after the bus, Mr. Osei called her into his office. She sat across from him with her hands in her lap and her expression open and attentive. He had a paper on the desk in front of him that he looked at without picking up. The company, he said, was restructuring. The word restructuring landed in the room and sat there with the particular heaviness of a word that has been chosen because it sounds cleaner than what it means. Several positions were being reviewed. Data entry as a department was being partially automated. He was sure she understood. She understood. He slid an envelope across the desk. 1 month's salary. Her last day was Friday. She picked up the envelope. She stood up. She thanked him, which surprised him. She could see it in the small shift of his expression, and she walked back to her desk and sat down and continued working for the remainder of the day because her work was not finished, and leaving it undone was not something she was capable of regardless of the circumstances. She told her mother that evening in the kitchen while the rice was cooking. She said it plainly because Grace had not raised her to dress hard things in soft clothing. Grace listened without interrupting. When Amara finished, Grace was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot with the slow, deliberate movement of a woman thinking. "Something else will come," Grace said. "I know," Amara said. "Before it does, we will manage." "I know, Mama." Grace looked at her daughter. "You are not frightened." It was not a question. Amara considered it anyway. "I am," she said. "I am just not going to let it make my decisions." Grace looked at her for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the stove and said nothing more because nothing more was needed. She had raised this girl. She knew what she was made of. She had put it there herself, thread by thread, the way you make something that is meant to last. Friday came. Amara cleared her desk in 12 minutes. She said goodbye to the colleagues who were there and did not make it large. She walked out into the afternoon with her small box of personal items and stood on the pavement outside the building and looked at the street. She had 73 days of savings. She had calculated it the night before with the careful precision she applied to everything. 73 days if they were careful. 60 if anything unexpected happened. Her mother's next prescription was in 3 weeks. She began looking for work that same afternoon. She was not proud in the way that prevents action. She applied for everything she was qualified for and several things she was not yet qualified for but was willing to learn. She rewrote her application letter 4 times until it said exactly what she meant and nothing extra. She followed up on every submission. She attended 2 interviews in the first week, both of which went well by every measure she could assess, and neither of which called her back. She did not allow herself more than 10 minutes of discouragement per day. That was the rule she set. 10 minutes to feel whatever needed to be felt, and then back to the work of fixing it. It was during the 3rd week, on a Tuesday morning, that she saw Eleanor again. She had taken the same bus, not because she needed to go that direction particularly, but because her interview that morning was on the other side of the city and the route passed through the central station. She got on at the usual stop. The bus was crowded in the usual way. She found a spot near the middle and held the rail and watched the stops pass. 2 stops before the central station, Eleanor got on. She was dressed similarly to before, printed blouse, cloth bag, careful steps. She stood at the front and looked down the aisle with that same patient, composed expression. This time, before Amara could move, the man across the aisle, the same man who had been watching 3 weeks ago, stood up and gestured toward his seat. Eleanor looked at him and nodded and made her way down the aisle. And as she passed Amara, she stopped. She looked at her with a recognition that was immediate and certain. "Amara," she said. Amara looked at her. "Eleanor. Good morning." Eleanor studied her face for a moment the way she had on the bus 3 weeks ago, that careful, reading quality. "You look like someone carrying something new," she said quietly. Amara almost said she was fine. The word was right there, the reflexive word, the word that costs nothing and communicates nothing. She did not say it. "I lost my job," she said instead. Simply, without drama. "I am looking for something else." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. The bus moved. She held the rail beside Amara and looked at her steadily. "What kind of work can you do?" she asked. "Data management. Administration." I am good with systems and I learn quickly. She paused. I can do most things if someone gives me the chance to show them. Eleanor nodded. She reached into her cloth bag. She produced a small card and held it out. It was plain, cream-colored, with a name and a number and nothing else. Call this number tomorrow morning, Eleanor said. Before 9. Ask for Margaret. Tell her Eleanor sent you and that I said to treat your call as a priority. Amara looked at the card. She looked at Eleanor. You don't know me, she said. Not suspiciously. Honestly. I know enough, Eleanor said. The same words, almost, that Fiona had said to a different woman on a different road. The words that mean I have been watching and what I have seen is sufficient. I have been in the business of reading people for 50 years. I know what I saw on this bus 3 weeks ago. Amara held the card carefully. What did you see? She asked. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. Someone who does the right thing when there is nothing in it for her, she said. In my experience, that is the rarest qualification of all. And it is the only one I have never been able to train into a person who does not already have it. The bus reached the central station. Eleanor moved toward her seat. Amara stood holding the small cream card and looked at the name on it and felt something she recognized from a long time ago, from before the fluorescent lights and the gray carpet and the envelopes slid across desks. She felt the particular feeling of a door that has not yet opened but is no longer locked. She put the card carefully in the inside pocket of her bag, the one with the zip, where she kept the things she could not afford to lose. She did not know yet whose mother Eleanor was. She did not know what company the card connected to or what the building looked like or what the next weeks would bring. She knew only what she had always known, that you do not do the right thing because of what it might return to you. You do it because it is the right thing. But sometimes, quietly and without announcement, it returns anyway. She got off at the central station. She walked to her interview. She held herself the way her mother had taught her, the way Eleanor had noticed from a crowded bus, head up, back straight, the walk of a woman who knows where she is going even when she is still figuring out the direction. Tomorrow morning she would call before 9. She would ask for Margaret. Tonight she would go home and make dinner and give her mother the medication and sit at the small table by the window. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the 30 minutes that belonged entirely to her felt like something other than the edge of a cliff. They felt like the beginning of a road. The number rang twice. A woman picked up on the second ring with the crisp efficiency of someone who had been at her desk for at least an hour already. Good morning, Meridian Group. How may I direct your call? Amara looked at the clock on the wall. 8:47. Good morning. My name is Amara Mensah. I am calling for Margaret. Eleanor asked me to call and said to treat it as a priority. A brief pause. Not the pause of confusion. The pause of someone shifting gears. One moment please, Ms. Mensah. The hold music was brief. Then a different voice, older, businesslike but not unkind. This is Margaret. Eleanor called me last night about you. Can you come in this afternoon at 2? Amara looked at her notebook where she had written the address from the card. Meridian Group. 14th floor. Central Business District. Yes, she said. I will be there. She wore the black dress she kept for serious occasions. It was 4 years old but well made and she had cared for it the way her mother had taught her to care for good things, which was the same way her mother had taught her to care for everything, with attention and without waste. She pressed it the night before and hung it on the back of the door and in the morning she looked at it and felt ready. The building was glass and steel and announced itself from 2 blocks away. A lobby with floors so polished she could see herself in them. A reception desk staffed by 2 people in matching blazers who looked up when she walked in with the evaluating efficiency of people trained to form impressions in seconds. She gave her name. She was expected. She was directed to the 14th floor. Margaret turned out to be a compact woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the manner of someone who had seen everything and maintained her standards regardless. She shook Amara's hand firmly and looked at her directly and sat her down across a desk that was organized with a precision that Amara immediately respected. The interview was not what Amara had expected. Margaret did not ask her to describe her greatest weakness or where she saw herself in 5 years. She asked her specific questions. How do you prioritize when everything is urgent? Walk me through a time a system failed and what you did. If you discovered a colleague had been making an error for 3 months that no one had noticed, what would you do first? Amara answered each question the way she did everything, directly, without decoration, thinking before she spoke and meaning what she said when she did. She did not perform confidence. She simply was not afraid of the questions because she had been asked harder ones by life and had answered those too. At the end, Margaret sat back and looked at her for a moment. Eleanor does not make recommendations lightly, she said. In 22 years she has recommended 4 people to me directly. All 4 are still with this company. Amara said nothing. She waited. The position is Executive Administrative Coordinator to the CEO, Margaret said. It is not a junior role. It requires discretion, precision, and the ability to manage pressure without it managing you. The previous person in this role left last month. She paused. Are you familiar with Meridian Group? Real estate and corporate development, Amara said. Founded 20 years ago. Operating across 6 sectors. The CEO built it from a single import desk. Something moved in Margaret's expression. Slight but real. You prepared, she said. I always prepare, Amara said. Margaret looked at her for another moment. Then she picked up her pen. We will do a second interview with the CEO next week. I will call you with the time. She paused. He is not an easy man to work with. He is precise and he moves fast and he has very little patience for anything that is not done properly the first time. Neither do I, Amara said. This time Margaret did not suppress the expression. It was not quite a smile. It was the look of someone who has heard the right answer and is deciding whether to believe it. She decided. We will be in touch, Ms. Mensah, she said. Amara took the elevator down alone. She stood in the polished lobby for a moment and looked at the building around her, at the clean lines of it, at the people moving through with the focused energy of a place where things were built and decisions were made and the work was real. She thought about the gray carpet and the fluorescent light that buzzed. She thought about the envelope slid across a desk by a man who could not make eye contact. She walked out into the afternoon and called her mother. How did it go? Grace asked immediately. I have a second interview next week. A silence. The particular silence of a woman who has been holding her breath and is now releasing it carefully, so her daughter does not hear how worried she has been. Good, Grace said. Her voice was even. I knew it would. You couldn't have known that, Mama. I know you, Grace said simply. Same thing. The second interview was on Thursday. She was taken not to Margaret's office but to a different floor. Higher. The view from the window showed the whole city spread below, organized and indifferent and beautiful in the way cities are when you are above them. The office was large but not ostentatious. A desk, 2 chairs, shelves of books that had clearly been read, not placed for appearance. A single framed photograph on the desk that she did not look at directly. She sat and waited. He came in at exactly the scheduled time, which she noted. A man in his early 40s, tall, with the focused economy of movement of someone who had long since stopped doing anything without purpose. He sat across from her and opened a folder and looked at it briefly and then closed it and looked at her directly. His name was David Mensah. She had read everything publicly available about him. Built the company from nothing. Known for precision and high standards and for promoting from within. Known also for being difficult to impress. He looked at her resume for exactly 4 seconds. Then he set it down. Margaret tells me Eleanor recommended you, he said. Yes. Eleanor recommends very few people. She told me something similar. He looked at her steadily. Why did she recommend you? Amara considered the question. She could have given him the professional answer. The competencies, the experience, the qualifications. She gave him the true one instead. I gave her my seat on a bus, she said. And when 2 women laughed at her, I said something. The room was very quiet. Something shifted in his face. It was not dramatic. It was not the sudden visible emotion of a man caught off guard. It was something smaller and therefore more significant. A settling. The expression of a person who has just understood something they had been trying to understand for a while. On the 47 bus, he said. It was not a question. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the desk, then back at her. She told me about a young woman on the bus, he said. She didn't know your name then. She told me about her every day for a week. He paused. My mother does not tell me about people unless they have shown her something worth telling. Amara said nothing. She waited the way she had learned to wait, with patience and without anxiety, because waiting is not weakness and silence is not empty. She is 74 years old, David said. She insists on riding the bus when her car is in the garage because she says it keeps her honest. She says offices and drivers make you forget what the world actually looks like. He looked at Amara steadily. Most people on that bus look through her. I saw her, Amara said simply. Yes, he said. She told me. He picked up the folder again. He opened it and this time he read it properly, moving through each page with a focus that was itself a form of respect, she realized. He was not performing consideration. He was actually considering. When he finished he set it down again and looked at her. I am going to ask you 3 questions, he said. I need you to answer them without thinking too long because the answers I need are not the kind that improve with performance. All right, she said. When something goes wrong and it is not your fault, what do you do first? Fix it, she said. The fault question comes after. When someone above you makes a decision you think is wrong, what do you do? I tell them once, clearly, with my reasoning. Then I carry out the decision unless it crosses an ethical line. And if it crosses an ethical line I say so again and I am prepared to accept the consequences. He nodded once. Last one. He paused. What do you want? The question sat in the room. It was not what she had expected and he knew it and had asked it anyway. She looked at him directly. I want work that is worth doing, she said. I want to be somewhere that my precision matters and my judgment is used not wasted. I want to earn what I am worth. She paused. And I want to take care of my mother. The last sentence she had not planned to say. It came out because it was true and because she had decided somewhere between the lobby and this room that she was not going to be smaller than she was in order to seem acceptable. David looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the folder. The role starts Monday, he said. Margaret will send you the details this afternoon. He stood and extended his hand and she stood and shook it and his grip was firm and direct, the handshake of a man who means what he does. She took the elevator down alone again. Same polished lobby. Same city outside the glass doors. Everything identical to the week before. Everything completely different. She stepped out onto the pavement and stood in the afternoon light and thought about a Monday morning 3 weeks ago. A crowded bus. Worn shoes. A woman standing at the front of the aisle with white hair and a cloth bag, looking for a seat that no one was offering. One small decision. Not a calculated one. Not a strategic one. Just the right thing, done because it was right, because her mother had raised her to understand that there is no version of a good life that does not include seeing the people in front of you. She called her mother again. Mama, she said. Yes. I start Monday. The silence this time was different, full in a way that had nothing to do with worry. Come home, Grace said quietly. I am making your favorite. Amara walked to the bus stop. The same route. The same city. She stood and waited and when the bus came she got on and found a spot near the middle and held the rail and looked out at the streets moving past. She did not yet know what Monday would bring. She did not know the full weight of what she had stepped into, the complexity of the work, the pace of it, the particular challenges of being new and young and female in a room full of people who would measure her before she had spoken a word. She did not know yet the ways this job would stretch her or the moments it would require everything she had. She knew only what she had always known. That you keep your head up. That you do the work in front of you and you do it completely. That the people who deserve to see you will see you and the ones who don't are not the measure of your worth. And that somewhere in a building with polished floors a woman named Eleanor had opened a notebook 3 weeks ago and written down her name. Not because of anything Amara had hoped to gain. Because of what she had simply, quietly, without audience, chosen to give. Monday arrived the way important days often do. Without fanfare. Without any external signal that this particular morning was different from the ones before it. The same gray light coming through the curtain. The same sound of the city starting itself up outside the window. The same small kitchen where Grace was already moving quietly, already heating water, already doing the careful morning work of a woman who understood that the people she loved needed to leave the house having eaten something warm. Amara sat at the table and her mother set a cup in front of her and sat across from her, and they did not say very much. They did not need to. Grace looked at her daughter in the way she sometimes did, the long reading look of a woman taking stock of something she had built and finding it sound. She reached across the table and pressed Amara's hand once. Then she stood and went back to the stove. That was the send-off. It was enough. It was more than enough. Amara walked to the bus stop in the early morning light. She wore the black dress again. She had bought one new thing, a pair of shoes, sensible and well-made, not expensive, but whole. No split at the toe. No left shoe holding a small secret of wear and delayed repair. She had bought them with part of the advance Margaret had arranged, and she had felt no guilt about it because her mother had also taught her that taking care of yourself is not vanity. It is maintenance. You cannot pour from an empty vessel, and you cannot walk with confidence in shoes that are falling apart. She arrived at the building 12 minutes early. Margaret met her at the elevator with a schedule printed and a briefing delivered in the direct, efficient manner Amara had already come to respect. The day was structured. There were meetings to prepare for, correspondence to manage, a filing system that needed reorganizing because the previous coordinator had developed a personal logic that made sense to no one else. Margaret walked her through everything once and only once, which Amara understood was both a test and a courtesy. She paid attention accordingly. The office was large and organized and moved at a pace that required constant calibration. Amara calibrated. She asked questions when she needed to and did not ask them when she did not. She made no errors on the first day, which she considered the minimum acceptable standard. She stayed 40 minutes after the official end of the day to finish the filing reorganization because she had started it, and leaving it half done was not something she was capable of. When she finally took the elevator down, the lobby was quieter, the cleaning staff moving through with their carts, the day folding itself up. She walked out into the evening and stood on the pavement and exhaled slowly. Day 1. She had not yet seen David. He had been in back-to-back meetings all day, his schedule a sequence of names and times that she had managed from the outside, coordinating, preparing, anticipating. She had spoken to him twice by phone, brief exchanges. Both times he had been direct and she had been direct back, and both times he had moved on without comment, which she took to mean the exchanges had been adequate. On Wednesday she saw him properly for the first time since the interview. He came out of a meeting that had run long and stopped at her desk on the way to his office. He looked at the reorganized filing system on the shared drive she had restructured and documented and made navigable. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "This took you 2 days." 1.5, she said. He looked at her. Something in his expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to it. He went into his office. She took that as adequate. The weeks settled into a rhythm. The work was demanding in a way she found clarifying rather than exhausting, the way hard work is when it is the right kind of hard, when the difficulty is proportional and the purpose is visible and the standard you are being held to is the same one you hold yourself to. She was precise and she was fast and she anticipated things before they needed to be asked, and she managed the pressure without it managing her, which was what Margaret had asked for and what she had said she could deliver. She delivered it. She learned the company from the inside the way she had always learned things, by watching carefully and asking the right questions and understanding not just what was done but why. She learned which relationships required delicacy and which required directness. She learned the texture of David's working style, when he needed information immediately and when he needed space to think, when the right response to a difficult situation was a solution placed quietly on his desk and when it was a single sentence that named the problem clearly so he could move. She was good at this. She had always been good at reading people and situations and knowing what was actually needed. The difference now was that her precision had room to matter. It was not disappearing into a stack of processed files. It was shaping things. Small things at first, then larger ones as the trust accumulated, as it always does, not in declarations but in the steady, unremarkable accumulation of days where nothing went wrong that should have gone right. Eleanor came to the office on a Friday afternoon in the third week. She arrived without ceremony, the same cloth bag over her arm, the same careful steps, the same white hair pinned up with the same attention as always. She stopped at Amara's desk and looked at her with that reading expression and said, "So, here you are." "Here I am," Amara said. Eleanor looked around the office. She looked at the organized desk, at the clean lines of a space that had been brought into order. She looked at Amara with an expression that had satisfaction in it but not surprise, the look of someone whose expectation has been confirmed rather than exceeded because the expectation was already high. "How is it?" Eleanor asked. "It is the right work," Amara said. "I did not know how much that mattered until I was doing it." Eleanor nodded. She sat in the chair beside the desk, not the formal visitor's chair, the smaller one to the side, as though she was simply stopping in rather than making a visit. She asked about Grace. Amara had mentioned her mother once, briefly, in passing, and Eleanor had remembered, the way she remembered everything that mattered. "She is better," Amara said. "The new prescription is working. She has been sleeping through the night." Eleanor looked at her hands in her lap. "Good," she said quietly. "Good." They sat for a moment in a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who do not need to fill space with noise. Then Eleanor said, "My son tells me you are exceptional." Amara looked at her. "He said that." "He said, and I am quoting him precisely because I wrote it down, that you are the first person in that role who makes him feel that the work on his desk is the only work he needs to think about." Eleanor paused. For a man who has been managing everything himself for 20 years, that is not a small thing to say. Amara was quiet for a moment. "I am just doing the work properly," she said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "That is exactly what I mean." David appeared in the doorway of his office. He saw his mother and his expression did the thing it always did when he saw her, a shift that had nothing to do with the CEO and everything to do with the son, a softening that he did not bother to hide because he had never needed to. He came out and kissed her on the forehead and sat on the edge of Amara's desk in the easy way of a man who was comfortable in the space, which Amara noted because he was not a man who was casually comfortable in many spaces. "You came on a Friday," he said to Eleanor. "I come when I like," Eleanor said. "I am 74. You use that justification for everything." "It justifies everything," Eleanor said. Amara looked between them and felt something she did not immediately name. The warmth of being inside a moment rather than outside it. Of being included without being performed at. She had spent a long time on the outside of things, not bitterly, not with resentment, simply as a fact of her life. This felt different. This felt like a room she had been let into and the door had stayed open behind her. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were better than that. They were real. There were difficult days. Days when the pressure was high and the margins were thin and decisions needed to be made quickly with incomplete information. Days when she made the wrong call and had to own it cleanly and correct it without the luxury of dwelling. Days when she was tired in the deep way of someone carrying more than one life, her own and her mother's, and had to find the energy anyway because the work did not pause for tiredness. She found the energy. She always found it. Not from some inexhaustible reserve that she had been born with but from the same place her mother had always found it, from the understanding that the people depending on you are worth more than your exhaustion and that getting up is not heroism, it is just what you do. Grace came to the city 6 months in. Not to live, just to visit. Amara took a day off, her first, and showed her mother the building from outside and Grace stood on the pavement and looked up at the glass and steel of it and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would have liked to see this." Amara took her mother's hand. They stood on the pavement together and looked at the building and did not say anything more because there was nothing more to say, and sometimes the most complete moments are the ones that do not require words to finish them. Eleanor had them both to her house for dinner that evening. A large, quiet house full of books and good light. Eleanor and Grace sat at one end of the table and talked in the low, continuous way of women who have recognized something of themselves in each other. David sat across from Amara and they talked about the company and then about other things, and the conversation moved easily in the way of people who have already established that they are honest with each other and have decided to stay that way. At the end of the evening, standing at the door, Eleanor took Amara's face in both hands the way Grace sometimes did and looked at her directly. "I knew," Eleanor said simply. "On the bus," Amara said. "Before the bus," Eleanor said. "The moment you stood up. Before you had even spoken. The way you moved. The way you did not look around to see if anyone was watching." She paused. The people worth knowing never perform their goodness. They simply do it and move on. Amara looked at this woman who had changed the direction of her life with a card and a phone number and a reading of her character from a crowded morning bus. "Why did you ride the bus for 3 weeks?" she asked. "Really?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression that was old and considered and entirely honest. "Because I was looking for something," she said. "I have built a great deal in my life. My son has built more. But I have been in many rooms full of successful people and I have watched what success does to the way they see others." She paused. "I wanted to know if there were still people who looked. Who simply saw a person standing and stood up." She looked at Amara steadily. "There are not many." Amara thought about the man in the suit who had looked and looked away. The teenage boy whose gesture had died before it became one. The 2 women who had decided that the age and the bag and the bus were something to laugh at. She thought about her mother ironing a uniform on a broken iron heated on a stove. About dignity worn as armor. About being raised to understand that how you treat people when there is nothing in it for you is the only measure that counts. "My mother taught me," Amara said. Eleanor smiled. "The full kind, not the composed one." "Then she is the one I really owe," she said. She released Amara's face. She looked past her at Grace, who was putting on her coat in the hallway with David's help, laughing at something he had said. "A good woman raised a good woman," Eleanor said quietly. "And that is how the world gets better. Not in announcements. Not in large gestures." She looked at Amara one last time. In a seat given on a bus on a Monday morning by a girl in worn shoes who did not stop to calculate whether it was worth it. Amara walked home that night through streets that were the same streets she had always known. The city was the same. The air was the same. She was not. She thought about the Monday 8 months ago when she had stood at a bus stop in the early morning with a split in her left shoe and 73 days of savings and a mother who needed medication and a world that had not yet made any particular room for her. She had not waited for room to be made. She had simply been who she was. In a crowded bus. Without audience. Without calculation. Without any understanding of where it would lead or whether it would lead anywhere at all. And the road had found her. Not because the world had suddenly decided to be fair. The world is not fair and was never going to be. But because there are still people in it who are watching. Who are sitting on buses and walking through lobbies and standing at the edges of rooms, looking for the thing that cannot be manufactured or performed or placed on a resume. Looking for the person who stands up before they have decided whether it is worth it. Those people exist. They are rarer than they should be. And when they find each other, something is built that no restructuring can touch and no envelope slid across a desk can diminish and no laughter on a bus can reach. Something solid. Something earned. Something that begins, always, with a single ordinary moment of simply choosing to see.